Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week are Jeff Ranke and Anna Wells. We each have more than 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. How you doing this week, Jeff?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Good. Is that a new shirt?
It is not, but the first time I've worn short sleeves all year, maybe that's what you're picking up.
That's what it is. You know,
with spring-like weather that
I walked into the office today and I'm like, you know what? Jeff's looking smart today. Looking smart. Anna, how you doing this week?
You were like, sun's out, guns out, Jeff.
That's right. That's right. The sun came out for a hot minute. The moon blocked it and it hasn't been back since.
It has not been back.
All right. Well, you doing all right?
Yes, thanks.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Well, every week we take the 5 most popular stories on our websites and discuss the implications they have on our industry going forward. Before we get started, like and share and subscribe to everything that we do. Email us and subscribe on YouTube at IEN Magazine so you can get a notification whenever we go live. All right, before we jump into the first story, we got a word from our sponsor. Hi, I'm David Manti, and with me today is Rob Milner from FLIR. Rob, we hear a lot about the machine whisperers out in the industry, but there's a very simple problem out there that these machine whisperers still can't catch what they can't hear. So what can we do about it?
Well, we give those guys and everyone around them the ability to see sound and save.
You're gonna see sound?
You can, yeah. We can actually make sound appear like a hotspot on a visual image. Makes it really easy to use, and anyone can do it.
That is incredible. I look forward to talking about it more. Please join Rob and I for our discussion, Acoustic Imaging for Manufacturing, how to capture cost savings through sound. Hey, we're back, and up to 30% of your plant's total compressed air capacity could be lost to leaks right now. So download this on-demand new video podcast with Teledyne FLIR. I talked to Rob Milner about a new acoustic camera, basically a sound gun, that's going to help you fix the problem. Also, we're always on the lookout for Today in Manufacturing podcast sponsors. So if you're interested, reach out to Today in Manufacturing podcast president Tom Lynch at tom@in.com with sponsor the podcast in the subject line, and we'll get you set up right quick. Our first story this week. Largest global industrial wood pellet supplier files for bankruptcy. Maryland-based Enviva filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection last week. The company hopes to cut about $1 billion of debt by restructuring agreements with creditors. Enviva's debts exceed $2.6 billion. The company owes $780 million to a Delaware bank, $348 million to a German energy company, and $353 million in bonds from local development authorities in Mississippi and Alabama. Sirens started to sound after the company recently missed a $24.5 million interest payment. In 20 years, the company has built 10 wood pellet production plants around the U.S. South in the forested region that I didn't know this, but they call it the world's wood basket. Hashtag the more you know. Enviva hoped that the new plants would increase pellet production, which currently stands at about 5 million metric tons. The company certainly has its critics, like Dana Smith, executive director of the Dogwood Alliance, who says harvesting forests and burning wood pellets has a negative overall impact on carbon reserves, while polluting the poor communities near the plants. Construction is going to continue in Alabama, but the project in Mississippi is on hold. So, will Enviva survive? Fitch Ratings say the company faces, quote, considerable uncertainty, especially as it tries to renegotiate with customers. Anna, will Enviva see its way out of this, quote, questionable uncertainty, considerable uncertainty?
I mean, it's not a great show of confidence, but neither is filing bankruptcy. So I can see where things are a little wobbly over there. I don't know. What really stood out to me, though, was about, so you mentioned the critics of Enviva, the Dogwood Alliance, but it's not just Enviva critics that are out there. It's actually, there's a lot of critics of this entire industry. According to the Southern Environmental Law Center, a key part of the biomass energy industry is turning trees into wood pellets, and they call it a dangerous and harmful process that has long-lasting impacts on nearby communities and the people who live there. As the biomass industry has grown in recent years, these dirty pellet facilities have proliferated throughout the South. and they release harmful pollutions like nitrogen oxide, along with fine particles that can cause respiratory infections and asthma in nearby communities. They say that oftentimes these plants are sited near communities of color that are already overburdened with industrial pollution, and that these facilities continue, quote, a long legacy of environmental injustice in the South. The Law Center goes on to contend that these types of plants tend to be bad neighbors, not just in Viva, but they showed some data from the Environmental Integrity Project that documented all of the, I don't know if you'd call them necessarily bad actors, but all of the compliance missteps that were taking place in this industry. That data showed that in 2017, 1 in 3 wood pellet plants violated permitted limits of emissions.
Okay.
And Viva plants show up on their violators list in many instances, multiple of their plants. So I think the story is maybe a good reminder of how, like, just because something is dubbed as an alternative energy doesn't necessarily make it environmentally friendly. Mm-hmm. It's just alternative to what we've done before.
Yeah.
And so you can see why, in this person's case, they're calling this, the greenwashing tactics, and, saying that this is carbon neutral process, I think doesn't quite speak to all of the related fumes and emissions that are coming out of these factories. So you can see why this is contentious, why certain parties are maybe rooting for Enviva to fail in this circumstance, especially when environmental experts talk about the carbon monoxide that comes out, the gases off these pellets, and in the process is harmful to those communities. So, obviously that has very little to do with the bankruptcy situation. However, it might not encourage bailouts because, this person from Dogwood was saying that they have urged the federal government to not contribute any kind of funding to these types of plants. And so if and I know some of their what their arrears on are actually bonds from the local community. Mm-hmm. So they may have fewer lifelines than they would if they were maybe in a different industry.
Yeah. Well, that's wild. I mean, thinking about how that could impact those industries, or not industries, those local communities. I mean, $360 million owed to those communities. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, depending on where they're located. Jeff, technically, I think, they are technically an alternative energy, and they are technically a green energy because they're, burning a green plant. So
wow.
Technically, no.
Well, and I think, this reminds me, and I've used this situation before, when the drill sergeant always tell me, excellent initiative, poor execution. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of comes into play here a little bit, because one of the things that really sort of spurred Enviva to go forth and put up these new facilities and ramp up production, take out a bunch of loans, all of that, was in 2009, the European Union had their Renewable Energy Directive, and it said that wood pellets would be classified as renewable energy. They built it on a platform of it being a carbon neutral energy source, which Anna has covered. When you get into all the different dynamics in terms of the production, as well as just the sourcing, there's another area that Enviva has really drawn a lot of scrutiny for, because in theory, wood biomass should come from the leftovers, the waste products, after we've produced timber for homes and construction and everything else. Well, it's been speculated that they're also just basically cutting down healthy trees and chopping them up for that as well. So when you take all of those factors into consideration, Enviva was really counting on this push from the EU, which is where they send a lot of product to support these new facilities going into place. Well, then you get pushback because you really sort of put your business principles on a very shaky foundation here, to say the least. Gets called into question. People start pulling back from their use of this for those very reasons, and you find yourself in a really difficult financial situation here. You would hope that they can, I think the right move for them is to downsize, to scale down. Hopefully this Chapter 11 puts them into a place where they can restructure, because there is still a use for these wood pellets as a supplementary heating source. I'm sure, all across the Midwest, folks have pellet burners.
Yeah.
But again, they're meant to complement, not take the place of. I don't think they're really a utility grade energy source for all the reasons that we've just talked about here.
Yeah.
In the U.S., I think biomass makes up like less than 2% of all the energy produced, and that's for a reason. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we do have wood waste products where it makes sense to burn them, but to go forth and put this much energy into something that really isn't a carbon-free, renewable type of product or energy source doesn't make a lot of sense.
Now, scaling down a bit might be a good fit just because, according to a former maintenance manager, and it's a former worker, so grain of salt, as many as 8 of their mills are in such poor condition that they're producing fewer pellets monthly at a much higher cost due to costly and intractable maintenance issues. He says there's no way Enviva is coming out of Chapter 11. He told this to Manga Bay, which is a conservation publication.
Actually, a really good site. They actually do some really good reporting.
Yeah.
Pretty down, like they're not extreme either. Like the stuff that I was reading on there, they're pretty down the middle.
True. I feel like I have to say they're a conservation magazine though, just because it'll be like, whoa, the maintenance manager said the manufacturing equipment is not fit for service. He also said that they're not replacing equipment at the plants with the materials that are going to fix the problems. He foresees plants are going to keep going out of service for days at a time, and the company is going to continue spending millions to patch them up. So if every ton of pellets is being produced at a loss, maybe scaling back a little bit isn't the worst case scenario. All right, our next most popular story this week. VW's new tech could keep you from hitting a deer. In Australia, kangaroos account for more than 80% of fatal animal strike collisions. Kangaroos are heavy, often weighing 100 pounds or more, making accidents doubly devastating to animal and driver. So, VW developers working with the University of Melbourne created RooBadge, an aftermarket device that VW owners can swap in place of their existing front VW badge. The new badge has a very special function. It emits specific sounds that kangaroos just can't kick. The RooBadge uses directional technology to project certain sounds, like bird calls, distress signals, or predator noises. These are projected ahead of the vehicle to keep kangaroos from approaching. Next, the developers want to expand the technology to new regions and different species. And Anna, as drivers in the Midwest, if we could figure out a deer badge, that sounds like a good thing to me.
We need a deer badge big time.
We do.
Well, firstly, I want to say that when we ran this story, the office conversation about kangaroos got a little bit out of hand. It really betrayed our lack of knowledge as to what kangaroos are, what they do, what they're capable of.
Such a violent creature.
A lot of fact finding. I think one of our office mates said deer and kangaroo are basically the same, except the kangaroo stood up.
Yeah. There were a lot of facts neglected, specifically by producer Alex. He's squirming right now.
Not
He's
factually
ready.
accurate. Yeah.
He's coming out swinging, just like deer and kangaroo.
He's on
brothers.
He's on Google right now. I'm gonna look up some kangaroo facts and tell those guys what's a what. That's what he's doing right now. So anyway, I love this story. I love that this technology comes at the collision issue from a different angle, which is prevention. Currently, I think the focus with automotive is how to beef up safety to keep vehicles and their occupants from being injured or killed. There's far less around lowering the risk of these incidents to begin with because it's harder, right? And I think this is even a gray area within autonomous vehicle technologies where animals are animals prioritized in that ethically? Does avoiding an animal fit into the algorithm? I think in your utopian insurance-less future.
Yep, that's right.
That would continue to exist as a problem.
True. Obsolete.
Yeah, but it never will be.
Yeah.
So I think we all agree.
We will see.
Not all collisions will be avoidable if an animal is already in your path. But if you can keep them from getting there, then that's the way to move the needle, I think. I don't know. And I think auto tech to this point has been tremendously focused on safety, mortality mitigation, collision avoidance, when these things are imminent threats. But let's make them not imminent threats by addressing the threat before it's right in front of your face, which is what I think is cool about this. Obviously, as you said, living in Wisconsin, there's deer everywhere, especially in certain seasons. There's deer everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't think any one of us has, doesn't know a family member or have experienced this ourselves of getting just utterly totaled
Yeah.
by a deer, and there's nothing that you can do about it.
The damage is sometimes incredible. Hard to believe.
It can be incredible, and through no fault of your own necessarily, you just cannot. Sometimes those collisions are just unavoidable. So you can see the urgency, of course, of trying to like test this out here in North America, and if successful, perhaps there's a future in licensing this maybe for Volkswagen. We talked about this before, but automakers are constantly trying to come up with new revenue streams, way that they can enhance their ability to garner recurring revenue. And I think that this has some value for potentially consumers and other automakers as well.
More than 16,000 deer-related crashes just in Wisconsin in 2021.
That's crazy.
It is. And that's just deer. We're not talking about the raccoon that totaled the front of the Yaris at some point too. Yeah. Jeff, one thing that I like about this is a machine learning potential application is that it can identify what works, improve upon it, and get better going forward. It seems like a pretty good application for it, to be honest.
100%. That's kind of what stood out to me as well. I mean, when they're talking about a certain particular type of kangaroo that it can be adjusted based on geography, and it basically learns and understands that. This is what a connected car should be about. You know, let's get away from plugging in 6 different mobile devices and being able to stream Netflix. And doing these things actually keep the occupants safe. Yeah. The other thing about this is, and I'm not looking to get into a debate whether this is good or bad, but the reality is the human footprint is spreading every single day. We're getting into different areas, so being able to incorporate this in different applications is huge from a safety perspective, from a conservation perspective, and everything else. You talk about raccoons. Somebody has to go out there after that raccoon has been hit, or the deer, or whatever else. So just even avoiding that and the costs associated with having to have somebody clean up our roads with this type of stuff, I think this is huge. So the connected car dynamic, definitely the machine learning, and then this has, in my opinion, of the stories we're doing here, it has a definite thing that leads to the thing capability here. When we look at every place else we're going, I mean, think about railroads. Think about all the other different species of animals that we could avoid hitting with our vehicles. Think about fishing. All the commercial fishermen and women out there who don't want to get the other stuff in their nets, going after specific species of fish that they're looking for. Potentially that's where this goes. Even airplanes. We want to keep birds out of propellers, right? Or away from wind turbines, whatever the case may be. Granted, those are all unique environments where this would have to be adapted and adjusted and everything else, but maybe that's where this can take us. So I think it's a really cool concept to build off of.
No, and talking about planes, I mean, they already employ this type of technology at airports to try and keep birds away by, using predator noises, so that way they just don't get in the way. And just talking about how significant this is, Reuters says there are more than 1 million wildlife vehicle collisions in the U.S. that cost more than $8 billion annually. These collisions result in about 200 deaths and 26,000 injuries to drivers and passengers on a yearly basis. And it is wild. I mean, having just driven up to the cottage this weekend, the deer are out.
They're out.
And it's one of those where you see one and then you see another 100 and you're like, stay there. Please stay there.
Well, that's the thing with deer. I can remember in high school, we saw the deer off in the field, came to a complete stop with the vehicle. The deer came onto the road and ran into the car.
Oh, yeah. That was, Bill took one of those too, a former associate, where he showed up and he's just like, a deer just ran in my car, like full speed, highway speeds. And the deer was just like, I'm going to get Bill. Totaled half his car.
Crazy.
All right. We have a side-by-side comparison here from producer Alex looking at how kangaroos are just deer that have been to prison, apparently. You know what? Jump on that subreddit later to continue the conversation with Alex. Our next most popular story this week. Philips, which made millions of defective CPAP machines, has been ordered to overhaul manufacturing. Philips can't make sleep apnea machines in the U.S. until it meets a number of safety requirements. The news is part of a settlement this week that will force the company to overhaul manufacturing and quality control systems. It is a major step toward concluding one of the biggest medical device recalls in history. Now that the process, which dragged on for the better part of three years, is over, the company will also hire independent experts to vet the changes. The FDA also has to approve the company's plan. Most of the recalled devices are CPAP machines that force air through a mask to keep mouth and nasal passageways open during sleep. Untreated, sleep apnea can lead to dangerous drowsiness and an increased risk of heart attack. Philips has recalled more than 5 million of these machines since 2021 because internal foam can break down over time, leading users to inhale tiny particles and fumes while they sleep. Repair and replace efforts have been plagued by delays, and the government says the company failed to comply with good manufacturing practices needed to ensure device safety. Jeff, is this the right step, making Philips sort of shut it down until they can get the manufacturing right?
100%. Kudos to the DOJ there. And we've been saying that more often, it seems like, with a lot of these government agencies stepping in and taking more stringent actions, which is what we've been asking for as long as we've been doing this podcast. So some positives there. I feel like this story could take up the entire podcast.
Agreed.
There is a ton that we could dive into here. So I'll just hit some of the high points that I saw and check out the story in full on the site. The first thing that jumped out to me whenever I see these types of things, when there's this sort of egregious quality concern, why wasn't something done sooner when it was this obvious and it was done across this volume of products, 5 million units sold? Well, looking where Philips was, and let's remember, this is an $18 billion company with a B in terms of revenues. When you look at profits during this time, they were a $10 billion company in terms of profits in 2020. That was down to just over 8 in 2023. So they were experiencing some losses here. So you could see how they saw selling 5 million of these units for about $1 billion in profit and going, maybe we can just kind of wait this one out a little bit, which is beyond me when you're talking about not just the health of people, but putting them in, death's door, danger of dying potentially from the foam coming loose and getting stuck in their throats. So it's hard to even fathom that type of approach, but you can also see with the product life cycle of these machines being about 5 years, maybe they're waiting to make their quality adjustment on sort of that next generation item. But it's still hard to fathom how you could even look at it that way. Kind of continuing with some of the bad news, they're talking about 99% of the recall, or the 99% of the units being recalled. Those are the registered units. There's only been about 2.6 of the 5 million that were actually registered for them to recall. So there's still well over 2 million of these units out there that they haven't gotten a hold of. The other thing that wasn't really addressed, or I couldn't see anything from a recall perspective, is how customers are being reimbursed. Now, from the $500 million settlement from last year, they're getting something there. It's like for every individual, they're getting like $10 or $100. That's what it was, $100.
Yeah.
And then something for the machine, depending on what they paid for versus insurance and everything else. So it's very convoluted there.
Yeah.
The last thing that occurred to me here is how this is a microcosm of why we have issues with our medical system and our insurance premiums right now.
Yeah.
Because a big part of the price tag for all of these machines was paid for by insurance companies. Still a lot that was left on the patient, on the consumer to handle, but then how does that impact how the insurance company wants to react going forward? Because they're going to be on the hook for another one of these machines sooner. That drives up premiums, that drives up everybody's medical care costs. And it's just this ongoing issue. And it all goes back to the fact that Philips didn't do the right thing when they first learned about this piece of foam padding.
Yeah.
All the things that could have been prevented, the lawsuit, the safety concerns, putting all these people's lives at danger, basically, also impacting their bottom line going forward.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating and definitely worth checking into in more detail, especially if you're potentially one of those 2 million people who still may have one of these machines.
Or even if you use one or you know someone that used one, read this article. Just because you talk about the ones that they haven't got their hands back on. Our friend Ryan, he uses one, he knows it's been recalled, and he won't send it back because the unit they sent him to replace it doesn't work for him. He doesn't care for it. And so he's like using the recalled machine because the replacement they sent is an inferior product and doesn't help him while he sleeps. Anna, what were your thoughts on the situation that's happening at Philips?
Well, I think you raise a great point, which is that these types of devices are very personal. Sometimes they're very difficult to wear, which I think makes this all the more depressing to read if you consider all the people out there that are really struggling with sleep apnea, and yet they strap on this terrible machine every night and it chafes their skin and it wakes them up and it's uncomfortable just to try to protect their long-term health. And instead, they're potentially making it worse. And what I found strange about this report, so it covers a lot of things, as Jeff said. What it doesn't mention was that the FDA actually is attributing more than 500 deaths in connection with these devices. That was not at all said in this article, but they have put out a press release about that as well. Philips has said that they investigated the complaints, the allegations of malfunction, serious injury, or death. They have found no conclusive data linking these devices with the deaths reported. That's what they told CBS Money Watch. That said, the FDA has done a pretty detailed review where they attribute deaths to suspected foam breakdown and also detail the injuries that were taking place here, which include cancer, pneumonia, asthma, infection, headache, cough, dyspnea, which is difficulty breathing, dizziness, nodules, chest pain. There was a lot of things that came along with this because if you think about what they were talking about, not just the foam, those foam particles being ingested and also aerated, but also the chemicals that people were breathing in. And so I think that maybe this is just scratching the surface in terms of the long-term impact. The man that was quoted in this article talking about I don't know what happens now. I stopped using the machine, but I still don't know. You can feel the fear there. He doesn't know if there's going to be other long-term implications that he hasn't even felt yet. You really feel for these people that were involved in this. There's no question that this manufacturing process needs to be overhauled. Egregious just from a product design standpoint, but the slow response as well, just unbelievable. I mean, we've talked in the past about accountability and the recall process and how challenging it can be for the manufacturer to actually reach the people who own that product once it is out in the market. And this is a classic case of that. Once it gets out in the market, all bets are off in terms of how you can communicate that message. And to Jeff's point, there's 2 million people out there potentially who every night are strapping this thing on, thinking it is helping them, unknowingly putting themselves at risk. And that is just unconscionable. So, yes, somebody needs to step in here. This had to be done. Unfortunately for a company like Philips, who had a good reputation prior to this, has been in the industry for a long time. They need somebody stepping in and saying, we need to go through step A to Z, QC everything, start over from scratch and figure out what we're doing wrong.
Just to hammer it home a little bit, an FDA inspection raised a lot of red flags. Emails suggesting the company was warned of the problem about the problem with its foam 6 years before the recall. Between 2016 and early 2021, the FDA found 14 instances where Philips was made aware of the issue and was analyzing the problem and did nothing. Our next most popular story. U.S. residents admit to scheme to send aircraft parts to Russia. 2 Florida residents and Russian nationals have pleaded guilty to conspiring to acquire and illegally send controlled aviation tech to Russia. According to the DOJ, the pair conspired to secure orders for aircraft components and parts from Russian buyers, the majority of which were commercial airline companies. For example, they tried to get their hands on the Boeing 737 carbon disc brake system and then send it overseas. The scheme began around May 2022, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, and it lasted for about a year. The defendants attempted to deceive U.S. suppliers by indicating that the parts were going to countries other than Russia, like Turkey. The two also admitted to using straw buyer companies to conceal the parts' true destination and source of revenue. The money was certainly coming in, including $4.6 million that was tied to Russian airlines. According to the Bureau of Industry and Security release that came out in May 2023, export privileges were suspended for Russian airline Smartavia and freight forwarder Intermodal Maldives. The DOJ stopped multiple shipments. Both defendants face a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. Jeff, is it sort of a double negative that they're not just Russian nationals, but also Florida residents? Just like have you seen the meme, like Florida man, and then it's like falls out a tree, eaten by gator, and then scraps, no, okay, you haven't. Do you think there's just been an increase in these shipments going to Russia, or as a result of the conflict or the Ukrainian invasion, we've just seen an uptick in this?
whenever there's sanctions against any country, there's always going to be an opportunity for the bad guys to do what they do.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened here. They see it as an opportunity. Obviously, it's bigger picture than that, because for every one of these that we catch in this instance, and it was a commercial airline in theory that's using these parts, we know that there's things going on from a defense perspective in the conflict that Russia's involved with right now, that they're having trouble sourcing things.
Yeah.
So we caught this one. Who knows who else is out there doing stuff? And it's probably because what was scariest to me is it seemed really easy to catch these folks once you followed the money. I mean, it came from Russia to Turkey to them.
Yeah.
Like if they would have been a little bit smarter,
Not an intricate
and
web.
been a little more complex in the way they set up the money flow, they probably could have continued doing this for quite a while, which is really scary.
Jeff's not impressed. He's like, work on your shell company game.
Yeah.
I mean,
Amateurs.
seriously.
More than one level.
Yeah,
on.
I mean that's what's scary. The other thing, and I know that this would add tons of bureaucracy and cost and everything else to it, but we do have technology that can track everything.
Yeah.
I mean, to incorporate different types of GPS sensors, different types of codes, whether it's a QR code, even a simple barcode that gets scanned, whatever the case is. And I know the bad guys will always find workarounds, but we can make it as hard as possible for them to do these types of things, especially when we're talking about a country like Russia right now.
Yeah.
That we can't allow them any sort of quarter in terms of finding a workaround for anything anywhere, because otherwise all of these sanctions will have no teeth. And everything that's going on in Ukraine is going to go on that much longer, which we don't want, obviously. So it's interesting from a couple different perspectives. It's just figuring out the right way, I think, to integrate a lot of these technology-based solutions that we have in the supply chain, where we're used to applying them in other ways for more positive outcomes. Maybe we can incorporate them here as well.
Jeff, are we in a cyber Cold War right now?
I don't think there's anything cold about it.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to float that one out there.
Yeah.
Anna, one thing about this story is that I was intrigued by what actually brought these guys down. So it was a joint effort between the Justice and Commerce Department's Disruptive Technology Strike Force and the Justice Department's Task Force Klepto Capture. Just sounds like some really heavy hitters came in and took them down.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It sounds like out of a movie. Those names are very dramatic. But
Klepto Capture.
yeah, Disruptive Technology Strike Force. Da-na-na. It's a show on Netflix. Obviously this was a familiar scenario when we recently covered a story just like this on our podcast a couple months ago. If you guys recall, the Russian Americans who bought and sold components that were used in weaponry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And found on the battlefield. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I thought, or maybe I just hoped that was an outlier.
Yeah.
But maybe not. As Jeff said, it's just, the opportunity is there. And, maybe on our end, we're more sensitive to identifying that opportunity is there and maybe paying a little bit closer attention when you have a regime like that that's doing so much damage globally. But interesting, I thought that in both cases, the transaction circulated through Turkey. So think about that, everyone. Just putting it out there. It was reassuring, of course, that these people were caught. The Disruptive Technology Strike Force is described as a interagency law enforcement strike force, co-led by the Departments of Justice and Commerce, to target illicit actors, protect supply chains, and prevent critical technology from being acquired by authoritarian regimes and hostile nation states. I'm glad that exists. I like that we are so comfortable now as a nation talking about supply chains and how much they matter in every way, because I feel like pre-pandemic, that was just a word that only industry people used, and it just wasn't really in the public vernacular. And now it is. So I guess silver lining from the pandemic, screwing up everyone's toilet paper deliveries, is that now we understand that how valuable it is when, we have critical components that are not, we can't get done, or we have no visibility towards tracking these types of scenarios, right? So obviously heavily necessary there. The last thing that I noticed about the story was how annoyed is Boeing to be tied to this right now? Like the last
You
thing.
can't just say disc brakes. You got to say our disc brakes.
You got to say Boeing disc brakes. Like we want to be in that Google search, guys. Like, yikes. They have so much going on right now with quality concerns and things like that. And their CEO just stepping down and just drama everywhere.
Yeah.
But, hey, this too. How about that? We'll throw this one on.
It was the 737, so maybe it'll turn out that they were double agents. Just like, send them everything you can from the 737.
Or they're like, exactly. They're like, let's throw Boeing's name in there and just see what happens.
Doug, who's watching us live, it's always good to hear from you, Doug. He says they could have come up with a better acronym, but I don't know what you're talking about, Doug. The JNC DDTSF and the JDTFKC rolls off the tongue. Looking forward to see what else comes from the JNC DDTSF and the JDTFKC. We shall keep a keen eye out. All right, our most popular story this week. Quaker to shutter Illinois plant and lay off more than 500. The Quaker Oats plant that has been a staple in Danville, Illinois since 1969 will close its doors on June 8th, 2024. Last week, 500 workers found out that they would be laid off, but it might not have been such a big surprise. In December, the PepsiCo brand paused production at the facility while it sorted out a product recall. What started with concerns of contamination risk in its granola soon ballooned into other products, ultimately requiring Quaker to recall some 6 products, many of which are still not back on store shelves. The company says no confirmed illnesses have resulted from the recall, but the damage has been done in Danville. And I just had to use that line again. It's so good. The damage has been done in Danville. After conducting a, quote, detailed review, Quaker determined that meeting its future manufacturing needs would require a, quote, extended closure for enhancements and modernization. Because of this, the company determined that it would need to permanently shift production to other facilities. It might not have any confirmed illnesses, but the recall certainly made the company sick. Quaker blamed a 19% year-end dip in operating profit on the debacle. Anna, you put together this story, and at first we were kind of surprised that this was the most popular story this week, but I think that one thing comes down to a lot of our coverage is that when it's about people's food, everyone gets a little fired up, just because, everyone in our readership has some sort of connection to a Quaker product that was recalled.
Oh, for sure. Maybe you're a Captain Crunch guy, maybe you're a dips kind of person. No, so many products, as you said, more than 6 products in the end implicated in this recall. Started with granola and just sort of expanded from there. I think when you look at this, unfortunately, this problem is more likely, in my opinion, an ingredient one maybe versus a facility one. Salmonella more often than not is pertaining to like a problem that exists in contamination where an ingredient is harvested or grown, right? Animal waste, bacteria or something is in like a downstream, the water source or something like that. But since raw oats are not heated in the process, so these granola bars have those little oat specks.
Yeah.
Those pathogens are not killed when this product is produced. So that's why you're seeing these granola bars be recalled, and not just one production line, but many.
Yeah.
What happened here could easily have been like a contamination ingredient issue that becomes a plant issue because of cross-contamination. That happens sometimes where plants are storing raw materials and processed foods together in the same areas. Ultimately, salmonella tends to be entering the stream here before the plant. However, the other possibility is that it's on the floors, and that is one kind of scary possibility because we're reading more and more about bacteria that is resistant to cleaning. Research has suggested that this can be the case when salmonella has had time to form what's called a biofilm, which is when it has time to become established on a surface, basically. Apparently, this can take as little as like 5 to 7 days, at which point the salmonella becomes extremely resistant to sanitizing efforts, to the point where it could be, they said, even impossible to remove all the cells.
Gross.
So you think about how easy it would be for that to get inside and how hard it is to get out once it's there. So I think people are like, why have they not fixed this yet? How is this not? This plant could be in really bad shape and nobody knew it until the salmonella was discovered, you know? Mm-hmm. So anyway, what's interesting, I think, is there are things to be done, and in the U.S., we don't seem to be doing them. According to a 2021 ProPublica report, several European countries have dramatically reduced salmonella, specifically in poultry, by combating it on the farms where the chickens are raised. But over the past 25 years, they say, the U.S. has failed to bring down the incidence of salmonella food poisoning, even as the rates for E. coli and other bacteria have fallen dramatically. So we've gotten better at cleaning. Yeah. We have not done anything, I think, at starting at the ingredient source and addressing some of those risks for, you know, at these farms or with the bacteria runoff, whatever's happening there. Thankfully, nobody lost their lives. It sounds like reportedly there has not been adverse effects to the consumer population here. But however, you know, down the line here, some 500 people are going to lose their jobs, which is very, very unfortunate.
No, and a heavy toll on Danville. Jeff, I feel like this is a story we're going to be readdressing in another, 6 months to a year when they sort out the issue at Quaker. And I mean, once things come back onto shelves and they need to ramp back up production, they're going to need to find that capacity somewhere else.
Well, I mean, hopefully it comes back to that point. But when you talk about almost a 20% dip in operating profit, something had to give.
Well, I mean, if you look at those snack shelves, man, I mean, at least 20% of those shelves are missing. So that makes sense. That's actually smaller than I expected.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, we've already talked about this, how tight the margins are in the food industry. So when you're looking at that type of loss, man, like I said, something had to give. And when you look at this facility, I was really surprised that it traced back to salmonella. That's typically attached to meat products, especially like chicken and turkey. But when you look at, and Anna did a great job of sort of explaining what it is, what this said to me when they closed down the entire facility, is this must have somehow gotten into all the material handling equipment, the storage equipment, all of that. That was just way too expensive to replace or upgrade or maintain, especially faced with a 19% loss in operating profits. Yeah. So I think that all sort of goes hand in hand. You know, the other thing you're talking about with Europe and how they're doing a better job with handling salmonella and other types of contaminations, that's because we have this dynamic in the U.S. right now, and we've talked about this before as well, these factory farms. They are huge. They're enormous. There's a ton of different, livestock that are there, whether it's a beef farm, a chicken farm, whatever the case is. Over in Europe, they haven't gotten there yet. It's still much more of a manageable flock when you're looking at either vaccinating or preventing disease from spreading. It's a lot bigger task when you get on those huge farms. And while you could say that the resources are there to scale and handle those problems, it's much more daunting when you're looking at 5,000 chickens versus 500 of them. Plus, we don't like paying more for stuff here in the U.S. And when you start incorporating a lot of those concerns, and I'm not advocating for or against, I'm just saying the reality is, if you're going to take those, all the prices are going to go up. All the costs are going to increase. So it's that line we continue to walk on within food processing. How Quaker is going to respond and come back in terms of getting those product lines back up and running, I don't know. It might be a time to start trimming that line a little bit too.
Yeah. So Quaker reached out to Illinois and wanted to discuss future uses for the factory site. Jeff, do you think that maybe they were like, hey, you can use the factory. It's got a big footprint. Just maybe not anything for food.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of seeing that here with like the Oscar Mayer facility in terms of probably upgrading that one here in Madison now that it hasn't been operating for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Great space, all set up for industrial applications, but food is so specific in terms of cleanliness, FDA regs, even third-party audits and stuff that they would expect from a just a quality control perspective. So very different animal.
Just like cover it in a big tent and like a real thick bleach mist going through the whole thing.
Well, I think with this one, you'd almost have to somehow heat up everything inside to like 250 degrees just to kill everything off.
You got
a few controlled burns in there.
Yeah. Jeff's new business, like the factory oven. He's like, no,
we're not going to tent it. We're going to put up a big aluminum structure around it.
All right. Well, before we move on to In Case You Missed It, we have another word from our sponsor. Hi, I'm David Manti, and with me today is Rob Milner from FLIR. Rob, we hear a lot about the machine whisperers out in the industry, but there's a very simple problem out there that these machine whisperers still can't catch what they can't hear. So what can we do about it?
Well, we give those guys and everyone around them the ability to see sound and save.
You're going to see sound?
You can, yeah. We can actually make sound appear like a hotspot on a visual image. Makes it really easy to use, and anyone can do it.
That is incredible. I look forward to talking about it more. Please join us. Join Rob and I for our discussion, Acoustic Imaging for Manufacturing, how to capture cost savings through sound. Hey, the air is cheap, but the power isn't, so leaks are bad. So download this new video podcast available on demand to figure out how manufacturers are using acoustic cameras to catch these problems in real time. And we're always looking for a good Today in Manufacturing podcast sponsor. So reach out to Today in Manufacturing podcast president Tom Lynch at tom@in.com with sponsor the podcast in the subject line. All right, in case you missed it, stories maybe not as popular on the website, but still stand to make a big impact on the industry going forward. What do you have for us this week, Anna?
The story I selected was titled GM Drops Base Hummer, Cheapest Trim Now $98K. I thought this was sort of a little bit of an in case you missed it within an in case you missed it, or the thing that leads to the in case you missed it.
Okay.
Or something
I like
that.
it.
Yeah.
It's like a meta in case you missed it.
Yeah. It gets real complicated. No, it doesn't. I'm just kidding. The story is about GMC and how they had plans to rework the Hummer into an electric. Well-known scenario. It was widely mocked, I think, because the Hummer itself has been widely mocked since its inception. But as we know, GMC, after they killed that model, they announced in 2020 that they were going to reinvent it as an electric. Mm-hmm. They had plans for several trims, including an entry version called the EV2 that was due out this spring. So this is reportedly being adjusted, with GM Authority reporting the $86,000 base model is no longer in the works. This leaves GM with a handful of other trims, the cheapest of which is like $98,000 to start.
Yeah. At least they're continuing the Hummer legacy of it's expensive.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
There's even one variant that starts at $150,000. But to me, the really interesting part of this story is that for years, we've been talking about how consumers are trending towards bigger, higher-priced vehicles. So automakers could really do this stuff and get away with it. But the latest data from the big three points to the potential that buyers may be experiencing some high-price fatigue.
Yeah.
So as Bloomberg pointed out earlier this month, sales of pickups, the high-profit engine for many Detroit automakers, showed pronounced weakness in Q1 for Stellantis, Ford, and GM. What has replaced them? Higher sales of smaller and more affordable vehicles. Bloomberg says the shift is, quote, part of a broader shift to cheaper vehicles. I found this to be interesting because we have talked about this in the past, about whether once the shift takes place towards higher priced SUVs and trucks, can it ever go back? Mm-hmm. Or is that the end? Will small vehicle buyers just be devoid of options at that point? So I don't know, maybe not. We've seen automakers make some really swift changes in recent months in response to market factors, even scaling back ICE pickup production, which who would have seen that even a year ago?
Yeah.
Will automakers see this data as an aberration, or will they see it as a reason to provide some greater selection of both premium vehicles and entry-level ones? I don't know. What GMC is doing here with the Hummer is kind of irrelevant to that question. In sense, I think it's maybe just like an illustration of some of the hits and misses that are likely going to take place in the coming years as these automakers figure out the market and what people want. But I just thought it was interesting that came up, that maybe people are starting to say, wait now.
Yeah.
$98,000 is too much for me. And, you know, I think that's a good thing if people are making that known with their wallets and actually buying the cheaper, smaller vehicles because that's what they want and need.
Yeah.
Will automakers learn from that? I don't know.
And not just high price fatigue, but high price shock. Like my family was just ready and willing to jump into hashtag van life. And then we saw that $60,000 price tag, and I'm like, maybe maybe we're going to run that Yaris into the ground.
Into the ground.
I mean, and while it has 3 wheels in the grave, we're going to run that last one in there. Jeff, did you have a chance to check out the now slightly more already expensive Hummer?
Well, it's just interesting that of all the vehicles to sort of spotlight or bring more attention to, it is the Hummer, because it already seemed like a very niche audience to begin with. So maybe it doesn't help illustrate the best example of how the prices need to come down and become more affordable, but it is an interesting one to choose. When we think about these vehicles, the things that always gets me, and I was just curious while you were talking there, I had to see how much this electric Hummer is going to weigh, because they always talked about the weight of these things.
Yeah.
This is a 9,000-pound vehicle. Oof. That is literally a ton more, than the Rivian or the Ford F-150 Lightning. So when you look at that, what that says to me is it's going to need to be charged more sooner. I'm talking real well here.
Yeah.
It's going to need to be charged more frequently. The range will not be as great. It's also potentially going to go through that battery more quickly, which leads to updated maintenance costs. It's just going to be more expensive to own as well as we get into these bigger SUVs and trucks. So how that dynamic plays out over the long term is also going to be interesting. If that doesn't lead people to say, maybe I could get away with a smaller EV if possible, because the battery's going to last longer and I won't have to plug it in as much and my electric bill won't go up as much. So
a 2010 Hummer H3, 4,700 pounds. 4,700
doubled
pounds.
in weight.
Yeah. That's just, I'm trying to imagine that is massive.
It's a big old battery.
Do not get in that thing's way. Yeah. We already know that our guardrails aren't going to stop it anytime soon. Jeff, what's your in case you missed it this week?
So I'm sure when whoever posted this story, they had to know I was probably going to grab this one.
Okay.
Because I love these agriculture technology stories. So the one that I looked at was this new app that's there to assist farmers in forecasting. So basically, scientists at Texas A&M AgriLife Research within the Agriculture and Life Sciences Division are developing a tool that will give farmers a glimpse into the future for planning purposes. They got a $750,000 grant from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture to develop a tool that can help forecasting pretty much whatever you need to on a farm in terms of looking at weather conditions, water tables, crop yields, all of this from a historical perspective, but also looking at the current environment and trying to make forecasts so that farmers can do a lot of things smarter in terms of how they fertilize their fields, if they want to adjust the crop rotation, how much irrigation might be needed, all of these things based on environmental as well as market conditions in terms of if one crop is up, another is down, maybe you want to adjust how you're planting that season. I just love all of this stuff because it allows the people that we depend on so much for a very basic necessity in our life to just be smarter and to be better business people and to bring an element of science into what is already biology. Yeah. So I just love everything about these stories. Plus, when you look at longer term impacts, the fact that we can be better stewards of our environment in terms of not over farming or overusing land, that we can have better yield percentages in terms of what we're pumping out so that farmers don't have to put in 14-hour days just to get by. They can work so much smarter and potentially not consume as many resources. So I think it checks a lot of boxes. And then when you look at where it could go, then we look at a lot of these areas around the world that have so much trouble growing field for any number of different reasons. Applying all of this technology to those environments as well could help them identify new opportunities to start a new economy, to really grow and become a bigger part as a world player potentially. Because we're talking about food products here. Okay? Yeah. It's something that we all need. The last thing is just, it's bringing in, whenever we talk about artificial intelligence and people get really worried and uptight about what it could lead to, this is an example of one of the great positive elements of, you were talking about machine learning before with the kangaroo sound system. Yeah. This is another one of those applications where AI can step in and play a crucial role in everybody's lives.
No, the AI under the hood on this app and in agriculture going forward, it's just an incredible tool. Like you're not going to have the farmer tasting the dirt and knowing that it's, soybean season. It has the power to run those equations and know all these different conditions, what is ideal, not just for the land, but for the market and for what is needed in the supply chain. It's going to be really incredible. It's going to take a lot of chips to run that, too.
The next step we need is some sort of sales tool. We've got a mutual friend who works in this area with agricultural technology, and it's just getting through that paradigm shift for a lot of farmers to really gravitate onto this new way of doing stuff.
It's getting there.
Here we are.
It's getting there. I don't know. My dad and his friends seem way more tied to their phones than they used to be. Just like, you guys used to chit-chat a lot more. Now you're all just checking your phones. Come on, kids. All right. Anna, what did you think about this new app that could be used to help with farm forecasting?
I think it's great. Farming 2.0. I mean, this is what has to happen, right? We've talked in the past a lot about how farming of the past is not conducive to the new generation's workforce. It's like hard work, and it's harder when it's not being done in an optimal way. And then secondly, all the climate concerns that we have to deal with in the modern environment, like weather-related things that were already a hindrance to farmers, are just even more so now. So this is how, like, agriculture is saved. I mean, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but like this is how it is ushered into a future with uncertain variables. So I think this is great. Yeah.
Well, this is how we potentially get back to some of those family-owned farms as well, because they can operate so much more efficiently and cost-effectively.
Well, thank you for the AI segue, Jeff, because for mine, in case you missed it, I chose an article written by Nolan Beilstein. AI-powered solution can bridge the skills gap in industrial maintenance. Fluke Reliability is a division of Fluke. They provide a range of technologies that are helping manufacturers do more with less. The latest is Azima DLI, an AI-powered vibration analytics and remote condition monitoring solution, which looks to be the next big thing in modern maintenance, in machine maintenance. Fluke Reliability acquired Azima in August 2023, and it offers a solution using a team of analysts that remotely look at data and provide insights to customers. Michael DiMaria, who is Fluke Reliability's Director of Product Management for this Azima product, says about 40 years ago, one worker was responsible for maintaining maybe 2 critical machines in a plant. Nowadays, plants rely on lean crews responsible for hundreds of assets. I chose this story. I think it's pretty obvious, but we always talk about the problems with this tribal knowledge walking out the door. Yeah. And this is a tool created specifically to address that. And I think that it's really important that DiMaria kind of addressed what workers are expected to do nowadays. Where, when you used to be an old maintenance worker, you had a couple of machines that you had to make sure are up and running. Now we're talking about like tens of thousands, 100,000 square feet, and downtime's a killer. So, Jeff, I don't know if you had a chance to check out this article based on Nolan's coverage, but I thought it really shows AI's potential in the future of maintenance.
I think what it also shows is how a lot of these traditional MRO companies, the Fluke meter, okay? That's an actual term.
Yeah.
From taking, looking with the multimeter and what that means now. And a company like that's been so solidly entrenched in the toolbox of maintenance workers in a lot of different fields for so long has evolved over time and is now embracing these types of technologies. I think that's what's a really cool part of this whole story as well. And then when you talk, you nailed it. I was just thinking about, we always call them the machine whisperer, the tribal knowledge, all of that kind of stuff. We're really trying to figure out a way to preserve all of that, and that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can sort of translate that over to a new age way of doing things, a better way of doing things, more evolved perspective on something like maintenance, I think is awesome. It also brings shines a spotlight on how important the maintenance manager is.
Oh, yeah.
And it just puts much more credence when you're working in it every day, But I think there can be a tendency for that position to be, he's the guy who walks around with the shop rags and fixes stuff, and when there's a problem, we'll give him a call. It's beyond that. It's so much more than that. And I think these tools, setting these folks up to be that much more successful and how that emanates throughout the enterprise is awesome.
No, I definitely witnessed that when I was working in factories, is that the maintenance crew was almost a second-class citizen. Engineering departments would look down upon them, because they were making the machines, and it's just like, hey, without us, they don't run. Right. It also reminded me of big data, Anna, because according to DiMaria, AI can serve as the next iteration in machine maintenance, addressing the issues created by this skills gap, right? AI can also address the push to implement more proactive maintenance strategies. Now, when I talk about big data, that's because Azima has collected more than 67 trillion data points over 30 years, which gives it the ability to build this expert system that can tell when a machine could potentially go wrong, what the root cause is, as well as the corrective action. And I brought that point up just because we always talk about how sometimes it's hard to get our hands around big data and use it. And now with AI, that's becoming a little bit more manageable as long as you make sure that the right info is going into the machine.
For sure. Yeah. I think this path forward for Fluke has been really exciting. I interviewed Ankush Malhotra, who is Fluke Reliability President, last August, right after the acquisition was announced. And one of the things we talked about is, covering maintenance for so long in the plant, it's always been an issue where vibration analysis has been one of those huge challenges where there's not a lot of people that are well trained in that area. And so you would have like these analysts that were like very few and far between. It was almost like a skills gap in that niche that totally preceded some of the other skills gap that we're dealing with today in manufacturing. So for them to be able to address that now using AI and using this very unique toolkit in order to make sure that this stuff is getting done and done in the right way. This like solves a problem that has gone back like 30 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so exciting to see, as people talk about like, what are the use cases for AI? What are we doing? What are we doing with it in manufacturing? And to see this stuff actually come to life is pretty exciting.
Well, and whereas sometimes people mocked how augmented reality and virtual reality could be used in these maintenance scenarios, I think this one's undeniable.
Right.
And Nolan, who had a chance to talk to Ankush, he told him this anecdote where he remembers visiting a steel plant years ago where he saw a maintenance team of about 14 workers, and each had an average tenure of approximately 25 years. So, he understood an opportunity emerging in the market.
Yeah.
These workers are going to retire soon, and a less experienced workforce is going to take their place. Only now they're going to step into a much more vast environment than their predecessors. All right. Well, let's move on to our final thoughts before we get out of here this week. Anna, what's your final thought?
So tonight I have the opportunity of doing something that I know you guys are going to be jealous of because we all grew up in the same-ish time period. And I am going to a Scholastic book fair.
Yes, they're fantastic. Take my money.
I know. It's like the best place on earth to be. And that holds up even now. Like I went to one last year with my kids and I was just like, yes, get it all. I don't care. Put it in the bag. Like, I mean, it's a fundraiser also, which is great, but just the smell of the books, the big carts, all the weird, they got all this weird stuff now, like furry diaries and like sticker books and stuff. Like we didn't have the extent of the variety that they do now, but I'm still very excited.
But we were still drawn in by that weird stuff, right? Like it was a book that also came with a poster, that also came with stickers. And if you bought 3 of them, you got 2 free books, but you had to choose 2 that were under $2. I love whenever that the Scholastic book sheet comes home.
Yeah.
The only time we've been burned on that was we had one that came home in October or November, and I'm just like, great, 2 birds, 1 stone, fundraise for the school and Christmas gifts. The shipments to the school got in an accident and all the books were destroyed. And so we didn't get our books, we didn't get our order until of
course, David.
Well, it wasn't just me, it was like everyone in the school district. Yeah. But so they wound up actually being in a significant number of, they were in Valentine's Day gifts and like Easter baskets. We're still working through, I still have like a couple of like Christmas themed Pete the Cats that are waiting for the next season.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Those will hold up.
I love those because that's such a cool opportunity to get you get a book and it doesn't close because it also comes with 2 action figures attached to it.
I know. Yeah. They've been, the kids have been like circling their stuff on the take home form. They're really excited.
This is the best. You ever do, you have any fond memories of that? Not so fun, maybe based on
I was not a reader in school. My sister got super geeked up for them, but I was more annoyed because they took off like half the gym.
Oh.
So going there for basketball practice, I'd be like, this sucks. Take down the bookshelf.
Oh, Jeff.
Just kicking over the bookshelves. Read later.
Oh, whoops. The ball went over there. It may have knocked something over.
Illiteracy now.
Let's just get it out of the way. Hey, I was 12.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was
You're
wondering.
forgiven.
I was wondering maybe with the family if any of your kids got into it at all.
My youngest daughter is a huge reader.
Yeah.
Reads books like beyond my understanding. She asked for this one book for Christmas, and my mom got it for her. It was a collection of essays from Latin American women about their struggles and everything else.
Wow.
It's like, man, usually like you'd have to make somebody read that, and that's what she was learning toward. I mean,
Usually you
grabbing
have to
for.
make somebody read
The
it.
like author is just like very thankful that you were the one person that bought that. Like, I got one sale. It came
but
from
the fact that
Wisconsin.
she knew about it and then
incredible.
is just devouring the book is, it's amazing.
That is, I gotta up my book selection game. My final thought this week is just that it has been a good season for Old Grease dodgeball. We lost one game over 2 seasons, and that was the last championship game. But this session, we brought it home. So it's been a good week, both Old Grease dodgeball and Old Grease darts. That's the franchise, in case you didn't understand. I mean, we're all part of it in some way. So it was just really good to raise that championship flag, but I can barely stand. Because when you talk about like leaving it all on the court, like it's still there. Like I don't have legs. I wish I was sitting. And it was just, it's a good reminder to get out and however you kind of blow off steam. I mean, if it is like some sort of midlife crisis that you go through while on a dodgeball court with people half your age, that works for some people, I hear. But figure out what works for you and make sure to get your mind out of the office and decompress. Jeff, what's your final thought this week?
Yeah, I guess the Old Grease volleyball team would kind of be like the Buffalo Bills. Great regular season, just cannot seal the deal.
Well, actually, that's like Old Grease, like legacy, just like.
I don't know, in championship games, though. I mean, softball, now you guys did it in dodgeball.
Yeah, no, we've had a banner 2-year window here. And you know what? This year's softball, we're doing it again.
There we go. Mm-hmm. Final thoughts. I was telling you guys about this next Netflix series that I was watching it's called Turning Point. It's from the atomic bomb through the Cold War.
Oh, yes.
And I finally finished it up, and it's incredible. I mean, I liked it because I'm sort of a history nerd, and it was all that stuff. But the biggest takeaway is I finished the last episode last night. It is just, and it doesn't hammer you over the head with it or anything, but just how you're supposed to study history to learn from those mistakes and not repeat them. And there's just this pattern of whenever they're going through this whole iteration of events, where we get to a point where we're doing so well, and then it just takes a little bit and we go the wrong direction again and just keep circling back. And it's that whole, I was reminded of that line too. I think it's Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, where he talks about people are smart, a person is paranoid, neurotic, makes weird decisions, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what it is in a lot of these cases too, and have these huge ramifications on a global scale. I can't recommend the documentary enough, but again, the takeaway there is, if you're going to study history and you're going to keep a record of anything, learn from it.
Agreed.
Like really, really take to heart those things that you learned from the past. It's okay to fall down. It's okay to fail, but take something away and remember that. Don't just sweep it under the rug because it was something that is hard to look at. Because man, we could have done things a whole lot better a whole lot of times.
That is definitely something that comes with reading historical content, like novels or nonfiction books, is that once you go into like the oral histories of war or other history books, like you realize how often we repeat it. And it's just like, it's right here. It's written right here. Did no one see this? Because like when I read it, I'm like, it blows your mind.
Well, and so much of it is, it's obviously a lot because we're talking about the Cold War, the U.S. and Russia, and where I think if you took a very unbiased approach on Russian history, they really have that issue. In the U.S., we're not perfect by any means, but I think we're a little better than others in sort of learning from mistakes and not going full circle and reverting back to them.
Yeah, we just flirt with them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Anna at IN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. If you want to come on as a sponsor, you can also reach Today in Manufacturing podcast president Tom Lynch with sponsor the podcast in the subject line. Love to have you on board. All right, for Jeff Franke and Anna Wells, I'm David Manti. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast. We'll see you next week.